Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The following content is provided strictly for educational and entertainment purposes. It does not constitute legal, psychological, or professional relationship counseling. Divorce laws, societal norms, and personal outcomes vary significantly based on individual circumstances and jurisdiction. Viewers are strongly encouraged to conduct their own due diligence and consult with licensed professionals regarding their specific legal or personal situations before making life-altering decisions. In 1960, the American family was often described as the bedrock of the Republic, a permanent institution where the divorce rate hovered at a mere 9%. Fast forward to the present day, and we are witnessing a fundamental mutation in the American social contract. We have shifted from a culture of till death do us part to what sociologists are now calling the divorce now mentality. Statistics indicate that approximately 40 to 50% of first marriages in the United States will end in divorce, with that number climbing even higher for subsequent marriages. But the statistic isn't the story. The story is the why. We are living through a period where the barrier to exit a marriage has never been lower, yet the emotional and financial stakes have never been higher. Why is it that in an era of unprecedented connectivity, the most basic unit of human connection, the marriage, is more fragile than ever? In this deep dive, we are opening the hood on the American psyche to understand the economic, psychological, and legal engines driving this shift. If you feel like the rules of relationships have changed overnight, it's because they have. By the end of this series, you will understand the invisible forces shaping your personal life and the broader American landscape. The problem we are solving today is one of clarity. For decades, the American public has been fed a narrative that divorce is simply a personal failure or a private tragedy. This perspective is not only reductive, it is factually incomplete. Understanding the divorce now mentality is about recognizing that your personal relationship is currently sitting downstream from massive historical trends and legislative overhauls. We are going to examine how the introduction of no-fault divorce laws in the 1970s acted as the first domino, fundamentally altering the bargaining power within a household. We will look at the expressive individualism movement, which replaced the idea of self-sacrifice for the family with the idea of self-actualization through the family. If the marriage doesn't serve your growth, the modern ethos suggests it's time to move on. To understand the current divorce now mentality, we must first look at the transition from the companionate marriage to the individualized marriage. In the early 20th century, marriage was a functional partnership. It was about survival, child-rearing, and social standing. Love was a bonus, not a prerequisite. However, as the American economy shifted and women entered the workforce in record numbers, the need for marriage changed. When a spouse is no longer a financial necessity, they must become a psychological luxury. This created a new, much higher bar for success. Today we expect our partners to be our best friends, our sexual icons, our co-parents, and our career consultants. When one person fails to meet all these diverse needs, the divorce now mentality presents itself as the only logical solution for the pursuit of happiness. Consider the case study of the gray divorce phenomenon. While overall divorce rates have stabilized or even dropped slightly for younger generations, the rate for those over the age of 50 has doubled since the 1990s. This is a crucial data point because it highlights that the divorce now mentality isn't just a byproduct of fickle youth. It represents a deeper shift in how Americans view the later stages of life. With increased life expectancy, a 50-year-old realizes they may have 30 or 40 years of active life left. The historical trend shows that staying for the kids is no longer a sufficient reason to remain in a stagnant environment once the nest is empty. This demographic shift underscores a broader American value: the refusal to waste time in an unfulfilling situation. We also have to address the algorithm of comparison. In previous generations, your point of comparison for your marriage was your neighbor or your cousin. Today, the divorce now mentality is fueled by a digital landscape that offers a literal infinity of better options, or at least the illusion of them. Social media platforms act as a highlight reel of everyone else's perceived marital bliss or, conversely, the exciting new life of the recently divorced. This creates a psychological state of hyper-choice. When the grass always looks greener on a high-definition screen, the friction of working through a difficult patch in a marriage feels like an unnecessary burden rather than a part of the process. The legal framework of the United States has also evolved to accommodate this speed. Before 1969, if you wanted a divorce, you had to prove fault, adultery, abandonment, or cruelty. You needed a villain and a victim. When California passed the first no-fault divorce law, It removed the requirement for illegal wrongdoing. While this was a massive victory for those in abusive or truly toxic situations, it also changed the exit cost of a marriage. It transitioned the institution from a binding legal contract into something more akin to an at-will employment agreement. We see this reflected in the divorce now mentality, where the emotional impulse to leave is no longer checked by a rigorous legal barrier. Furthermore, we must analyze the economic independence factor. Historically, the divorce now mentality was suppressed by the sheer impossibility of a single-income household, particularly for women. As the gender pay gap has narrowed and educational attainment for women has surpassed that of men in many sectors, the marriage premium, the economic benefit of being married, has diminished for many. Data suggests that in urban centers, the divorce now mentality is highest where women are most economically empowered. This isn't a bad thing, but it is a massive structural change. It means that modern marriage is held together solely by the quality of the relationship itself, rather than the structural supports of the past. When those supports are removed, the structure becomes much more prone to collapse under the slightest pressure. This shift has created a unique American paradox. We are a country that still highly values the idea of marriage. It is still a primary goal for the majority of the population, yet we have developed a culture that is increasingly intolerant of the compromises required to maintain it. This divorce now mentality is not necessarily a sign that Americans hate marriage. It's a sign that we have hyper-idealized it to a point where reality can rarely compete. We are going to look at the contagion effect. How a single divorce in a friend group increases the likelihood of other divorces in that same circle by up to 75%. We will explore how the consumerist mindset has bled into our romantic lives, where we view partners as products that can be returned or upgraded if they develop bugs or become outdated. By the time we finish this first segment of our masterclass, we will realize that the divorce now mentality is not a random occurrence. It is the result of 50 years of legislative changes, economic shifts, and a radical reimagining of what it means to be an individual in America. We aren't just looking at why people leave. We are looking at the very foundation of how we define a successful life in the 21st century. The stakes are nothing less than the future of the American family unit. Let's peel back the first layer and look at the actual math of the modern breakup. To understand the actual math of the modern breakup, we have to look at the transition from the asset-building era to the liability management era. In the mid-20th century, marriage was the primary vehicle for wealth accumulation in the United States. Two people joined forces to buy a home, share a single vehicle, and build a pension. Today, in 2026, the financial calculus has inverted. We are seeing a historical trend where the individual's financial identity is guarded more fiercely than the collective marital identity. This brings us to our first deep dive concept, the prenuptial normalization. 10 years ago, prenuptial agreements were seen as a sign of distrust or a tool for the ultra-wealthy. Now they are becoming a standard checklist item for middle-class professionals in their late 20s and early 30s. This shift signals a fundamental change in the American psyche. We are entering marriages with an exit strategy already mapped out. This isn't just about protecting money. It is about the psychological safety net that allows for the divorce now mentality to take root. If you know exactly what the exit costs, you are far more likely to take the door when the relationship gets difficult. Imagine a character named Mark. It is 2026, and Mark is a 34-year-old software sales executive in Austin, Texas. He is marrying Sarah, a marketing director. Unlike their parents, who likely shared a single bank account and had their names on every deed together, Mark and Sarah represent the modern siloed household. They have a joint account for the mortgage and groceries, but their primary wealth, their 401ks, their individual brokerage accounts, and their premarital equity, is kept strictly separate. Sociologists refer to this as the decoupling of the domestic economy. When Mark and Sarah hit a rough patch 3 years into the marriage, the math of leaving is vastly different than it was for a couple in 1980. In 1980, leaving meant a catastrophic disruption of every financial pipe in your life. In 2026, for a couple like Mark and Sarah, it is more like unsubscribing from a shared service. This ease of financial untangling is a silent driver of the modern divorce rate. It lowers the switching costs of life partners. We also need to analyze the opportunity cost of boredom. In a high-speed, high-stimulation economy, the American public has been conditioned to equate stability with stagnation. Historical trends in behavioral economics suggest that humans are prone to loss aversion, where we fear losing what we have more than we value gaining something new. However, the cultural shift in the United States has flipped this on its head regarding relationships. There is a growing regret aversion. The fear that by staying in a mediocre marriage, you are losing out on a potentially spectacular life elsewhere. This is the FOMO, fear of missing out, of the marital world. We see this play out in the rise of boredom divorces, where there is no abuse, no infidelity, and no major conflict. Instead, there is simply a realization that the partner no longer optimizes the individual's happiness. Let's look at the data regarding the divorce contagion effect more closely. Research from Brown University and Harvard has identified that divorce moves through social networks like a virus. If a close friend gets divorced, your own chances of following suit increase by 75%. Even if it's a friend of a friend, the risk increases by 33%. Why? Because it normalizes the divorce now mentality. When your friend David leaves his wife and suddenly starts posting photos of his new apartment, his solo travels to Japan, and his renewed fitness journey, he is effectively running a marketing campaign for the single life. He has moved from the burdened category to the liberated category in the eyes of his peers. For someone like Mark, who might be struggling with the mundane realities of a toddler and a mortgage, David's life doesn't look like a tragedy. It looks like an upgrade. This social proof is more powerful than any legal or religious deterrent. Furthermore, we must address the professionalization of parenting. In 2026, the expectations for what constitutes a good parent in the United States have reached an unsustainable peak. We are in the era of intensive parenting, where every weekend is a logistical marathon of travel sports, coding camps, and enrichment activities. This creates a massive amount of relational neglect between spouses. The couple becomes a logistics firm rather than a romantic partnership. Data shows that many American couples report feeling like roommates who manage a small corporation. When the emotional bank account hits zero because all energy is diverted to the children, the divorce now mentality starts to look like a survival mechanism for the self. The irony is that the very devotion to the children's success often destroys the stability of the home they live in. Case studies in family law also point to the silver bullet strategy in modern litigation. As the divorce now mentality grows, the speed of the process has become a competitive advantage. We are seeing a rise in flash divorces, where one party files and moves to sequester assets or change locks within 48 hours. This first mover advantage creates a high-stakes environment where the person who hesitates loses. This legal reality feeds back into the cultural mentality. If you think your spouse might be unhappy, you are incentivized to file first to protect your interests. It creates a prisoner's dilemma in the living room. If both stay silent and work on it, they both win. But if one person is planning to leave, the one who stays committed is the one who gets blindsided financially and emotionally. This brings us to the dopamine loop of new beginnings. The American economy is built on the new iPhones, new car models, new career paths. We have successfully applied this consumerist logic to our souls. There is a measurable neurochemical surge, dopamine and norepinephrine, that comes with a new romantic interest. In a culture that prioritizes feeling good over doing good, the natural decline of these chemicals in a long-term marriage is often misidentified as falling out of love. In reality, it is just the biological transition from passionate love to companionate love. But because the divorce now mentality is so prevalent, many Americans choose to chase the dopamine spike of a new relationship rather than do the heavy lifting of deepening an existing one. Imagine if we treated our careers the way we now treat marriages. If at the first sign of a difficult project or a boring quarter, we were culturally encouraged to quit and find a soulmate company, the economy would collapse. Yet, we are seeing this exact pattern in the domestic sphere. We are prioritizing the short-term gain of emotional relief over the long-term equity of a shared history. This is the disposable culture, reaching its final frontier. But what happens when the new becomes old? What happens to the wealth, the children, and the social fabric when the cycle of divorce now becomes a repetitive loop? As we look deeper into this, we have to ask, who is actually winning in this scenario? Is it the individuals finding their true selves? Or is it a system that benefits from two households spending more than one? Is the divorce now mentality a liberation or a trap designed by an economy that prefers us as isolated consumers rather than stable units? We've looked at the math and the social contagion, but we haven't touched the most controversial driver of them all. There is a specific psychological phenomenon taking over American households that makes reconciliation almost impossible before the first paper is even served. It involves the way we use technology to rewrite the history of our relationships in real time. In the next part, we are going to expose the digital gaslighting era and how your smartphone is secretly preparing you for a breakup you didn't even know you wanted. The era of digital gaslighting is not a conspiracy. It is a documented shift in how the American public processes interpersonal conflict through the lens of a handheld device. To understand how your smartphone is secretly preparing you for a breakup, we have to look at the psychological concept of the digital paper trail. In the year 2026, every disagreement, every perceived slight, and every cold shoulder is no longer a fleeting moment that can be forgotten or smoothed over by time. It is etched into a text thread. Historical trends show that couples are increasingly litigating their relationship in the court of their own message history. This creates a loop of negative reinforcement. When you are angry with your spouse, you don't just feel the anger of the moment. You scroll back and find 3 other times they used that same tone or failed to do that same chore. You are effectively building a legal case against your marriage every single day, often without realizing it. Imagine a character named Elena. Elena is a 41-year-old architect living in Chicago. She's been married to her husband, Julian, for 12 years. They are in a period of high stress, balancing 2 careers and the needs of aging parents. In 1996, if Julian forgot to call Elena on his way home, she might be annoyed for an hour, they'd argue, and by the next morning, the emotional slate would be relatively clean. But in 2026, Elena has a searchable database of every time Julian has been late, every short text he sent, and every time he failed to use a heart symbol. When Elena feels lonely, she doesn't turn toward Julian. She turns toward her phone, where the algorithm provides her with content that validates her frustration. This is the confirmation bias loop. The more she searches for terms like toxic traits or emotional neglect, the more the social media algorithms feed her bite-sized videos telling her that she deserves better and that her partner is likely a narcissist. This leads us to the rise of the armchair psychologist. One of the most significant cultural shifts fueling the divorce now mentality is the weaponization of psychological terminology by the general public. In 2026, we don't have bad moods, we have triggers. We don't have disagreements, we have gaslighting. We don't have selfish partners, we have narcissists. By labeling a spouse with a clinical term, the individual psychologically detaches from the responsibility of reconciliation. If a partner is labeled a narcissist, the only prescribed solution in the digital zeitgeist is to go no contact and leave immediately. This binary thinking, categorizing people as either healthy or toxic, moves the middle ground where actual marriage work happens. Case studies in modern therapy sessions suggest that couples are entering the room already armed with diagnostic labels for each other, which creates a defensive wall that is nearly impossible to scale. We also have to discuss the shadow audience. Every time you post a cryptic status or a photo of yourself looking great while your spouse is nowhere to be found, you are performing for a shadow audience. This audience consists of exes, coworkers, and strangers who provide instant validation through likes and comments. This creates a micro-validation feedback loop. If Elena posts a photo of herself at a solo brunch with the caption "Choosing me today," and she gets 50 likes within 10 minutes, her brain receives a hit of dopamine that her quiet, complicated marriage cannot compete with. The shadow audience functions as a constant reminder that there is a world of people who appreciate you, even if your spouse forgot to take the trash out. This erodes the exclusivity of the marital bond. You are no longer a private unit, you are a public brand, and if the brand of the marriage is dragging down your personal brand, the divorce now mentality suggests a rebranding is necessary. Furthermore, let's analyze the transition from shared reality to algorithmic bubbles within the home. In 2026, 2 people can be sitting on the same couch but inhabiting 2 completely different ideological universes. Julian might be watching videos about traditional family values and the importance of male leadership, while Elena is watching content about the liberation of the divine feminine and the trap of domestic labor. They are being radicalized by their own feeds to view each other as the enemy. This is the algorithmic divorce. The software is designed to keep you engaged by showing you what you already believe, which means if you believe your marriage is failing, the phone will show you 1,000 reasons why you are right. It effectively acts as a 24/7 divorce attorney whispering in your ear, providing case studies of people who left their boring marriages and found bliss. Consider the step-by-step detail of how a digital exit is staged. Starts with the archive. A spouse begins to move photos of the couple into hidden folders. Then comes the digital audit, where they check the balances of shared accounts and change passwords on individual ones. Finally, there is the social media wipe. In the United States today, the removal of a spouse from a profile picture is often the modern equivalent of serving papers. It signals to the social network that the individual is back on the market. This public-facing component of the divorce now mentality makes it harder to turn back. Once you have signaled to your 500 closest friends and strangers that you are done, the social cost of changing your mind and staying is often higher than the cost of actually leaving. You don't want to look weak or indecisive to your shadow audience. The role of the smartphone also extends to the physical act of finding a replacement. The divorce now mentality is bolstered by the knowledge that a new partner is literally a swipe away. We are seeing a historical trend where people don't just leave a marriage, they monkey branch from one relationship to the next. The presence of dating apps on a phone, even if they aren't being used, acts as a psychological escape hatch. It creates a grass is greener syndrome that is backed by the visual evidence of thousands of available singles in your immediate area. Someone like Julian, a stressful day at work followed by a cold interaction at home makes the infinite scroll of a dating app look like a doorway to a stress-free life. The app doesn't show the reality of a first date or the complexity of blending families. It shows a curated, filtered dream. But there is a darker side to this digital influence that no one is talking about. It isn't just about social media or dating apps. It is about the way our literal communication patterns have changed. We have moved from verbal resolution to textual conflict. When you argue via text, you lose 80% of human communication: the tone of voice, the facial expression, the touch on the shoulder. You are arguing with a screen, which makes it easier to be cruel. You can say things in a text that you would never say to your partner's face. These texts then live forever, providing a permanent record of the worst moments of the relationship. This record becomes the evidence used to justify the divorce now mentality. You aren't leaving a human being. You are leaving a collection of toxic screenshots. As we move forward, we have to look at the collateral damage of this digital shift. What happens to the children who grow up watching their parents communicate through screens and labels? And more importantly, what happens when the digital world moves from being a catalyst for divorce to being a participant in it? We are entering an era where artificial intelligence isn't just helping you find a lawyer. It's helping you decide if you should leave in the first place. In the next part, we are going to look at the AI-driven breakup and how the next generation of legal tech is making the process of ending a marriage faster, cheaper, and more cold-blooded than ever before. If you think the current system is fast, you haven't seen what happens when the human element is removed entirely. The removal of the human element begins with the automation of conflict. In 2026, we are seeing the rise of AI-integrated mediation platforms that bypass the traditional, emotionally charged law office. Historically, the friction of hiring a lawyer, paying a $5,000 retainer, and scheduling a physical meeting acted as a cooling-off period. It was a structural speed bump that forced couples to pause. Today, that speed bump has been leveled. New legal tech startups in the United States offer algorithmic property division and custody scheduling for a flat fee. This is the Uberization of marital dissolution. When the process of ending a marriage becomes as streamlined as ordering a meal on an app, the divorce now mentality moves from a psychological impulse to a frictionless reality. Imagine a character named Marcus. Marcus is a 45-year-old middle manager in Charlotte, North Carolina. He is frustrated after a series of circular arguments with his wife, Chloe. In the past, Marcus might have vented to a friend, slept on the couch, and slowly moved toward a counselor. In 2026, Marcus opens a specialized AI legal assistant on his laptop. The AI doesn't ask him how he feels. It asks for his zip code, his annual salary, and his estimated home equity. Within 6 minutes, the AI generates a potential outcome report. It shows him exactly what his life looks like as a single man, his projected monthly cash flow, his parenting schedule based on North Carolina state averages, and a draft of a settlement agreement. This instant visualization of a post-divorce life removes the fear of the unknown. By replacing uncertainty with a spreadsheet, the technology makes the exit look not just possible, but logical. This brings us to the concept of algorithmic asset stripping. In high-stakes divorces, AI tools are now being used to scan decades of financial records in seconds, identifying hidden accounts or inconsistent spending patterns that a human forensic accountant might take weeks to find. While this provides a level of transparency that was previously impossible, it also increases the adversarial nature of the split. When every single transaction is weaponized by an algorithm, there is no room for the grace or the messy compromises that used to characterize domestic settlements. The divorce now mentality is fueled by this precision. If you can prove with 100% certainty that your spouse overspent on a hobby 3 years ago, the desire to settle the score overrides the desire to reconcile. Consider the historical trend of the summary dissolution. Originally designed for short-term marriages with no children and limited assets, the criteria for these quickie divorces are expanding across various states. In 2026, we see a push for administrative divorce, where if both parties agree, the entire process is handled by a state computer system without ever stepping foot in a courtroom. This is being framed as a way to clear backlogged court dockets, but the cultural consequence is the further desanctification of the marriage contract. When the state treats the end of a marriage like the renewal of a driver's license, the public begins to view the institution itself as a temporary permit rather than a permanent bond. Let's look at the step-by-step detail of the automated custody battle. One of the most painful parts of any divorce is determining the fate of the children. In 2026, apps are being used not just to manage schedules but to track parental performance. Every late pickup, every missed FaceTime call, and every sharp word exchanged in the app's chat function is logged and scored. These scores are then fed into predictive models used by mediators to suggest custody splits. This creates a state of constant surveillance. Parents like Marcus and Chloe are no longer co-parenting. They are competing for a higher algorithm score to protect their legal standing. This level of data-driven hostility makes the divorce now mentality permanent. Once you have viewed your spouse as a data point to be defeated, the path back to intimacy is effectively sealed shut. Furthermore, we must examine the rise of divorce insurance and the financialization of the breakup. While not yet a mainstream product, we are seeing the emergence of specialized financial instruments designed to mitigate the cost of a future split. Historical trends in the insurance industry suggest that when you insure against a risk, you subconsciously accept that risk as an inevitability. In 2026, young couples are being targeted with life transition funds, essentially high-yield accounts marketed as a way to ensure that if the marriage fails, neither party is trapped. While presented as empowerment, it acts as a psychological poison. If you are constantly contributing to a breakup fund, you are mentally preparing for the end before you've even reached the 5-year mark. It turns the marriage into a hedged bet rather than a total commitment. Imagine if every time you boarded an airplane, you were required to spend 30 minutes reviewing the parachute deployment and the survival statistics of a crash. You would eventually stop flying. The same is happening to American marriage. The divorce now mentality is being reinforced by a professional industry that profits from the churn. From the divorce coaches who charge $300 an hour to help you find your light during a split, to the real estate agents who specialize in divorce sales, there is a massive economic incentive to keep the divorce rate high. In the United States, divorce is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is a machine that requires a steady stream of unhappy customers to remain profitable. Case studies of the divorce party industry also highlight this shift. In 2026, the ending of a marriage is often celebrated with the same vigor as its beginning. This is the final stage of the cultural shift, the rebranding of failure as a glow-up. When the community rallies around the person leaving, offering gifts, parties, and social validation, the social cost of divorce flips from negative to positive. For a woman in a stagnant marriage, the sight of her friend being celebrated for leaving creates a powerful incentive to follow suit. It frames the divorce now mentality as an act of bravery and self-care, rather than a painful dissolution of a family unit. But there is a hidden cost to this high-speed, automated exit that the algorithms don't account for. It is the loneliness gap that occurs 2 years after the AI has settled the assets and the divorce party has ended. Data from 2026 indicates that while the initial relief of a quick divorce is high, the long-term psychological toll of a low-friction exit is actually higher. When a marriage is hard to leave, people are forced to grow, to adapt, and to develop resilience. When it is easy to leave, that growth never happens. We are becoming a nation of relationship starters who never become relationship finishers. We have analyzed the legal tech, the financial hedging, and the social rebranding of the breakup. But there is one final massive pillar that is holding up the divorce now mentality in America, and it has nothing to do with the law or the apps. It has to do with the therapeutic state. We have reached a point where the very people we go to for help, the therapists, the life coaches, and the wellness gurus, might be the ones unknowingly pushing us toward the door. In the next part, we are going to dive into the self-love trap and how the modern wellness industry has made leaving the ultimate status symbol of mental health. We will look at how your therapist's neutrality might actually be a one-way ticket to a lonely future. The therapeutic state in 2026 has undergone a radical transformation, moving from a practice of reconciliation to a practice of individual liberation. This is the self-love trap. To understand this, we have to look at the historical trends of clinical psychology in America. For nearly a century, family therapy was centered on the systemic approach, which viewed the marriage as the primary patient. The goal was to heal the unit. However, in the current cultural climate, the patient is almost exclusively the individual. When you enter a therapist's office today, the primary question being asked isn't how can we fix this marriage, but rather is this relationship serving your highest self? This subtle shift in focus has massive downstream effects. It places the individual's immediate emotional comfort at the top of the value hierarchy, often at the expense of long-term relational stability. Imagine a character named Sophia. Sophia is a 38-year-old graphic designer in Seattle. She feels a sense of vague discontent in her marriage to her husband, David. David is a kind man, a stable provider, and a present father, but the spark has faded into the mundane routine of suburban life. Sophia seeks out a therapist to deal with her feelings of being trapped. In a traditional systemic setting, a therapist might help Sophia and David navigate the natural cycles of intimacy. But in the 2026 therapeutic model, Sophia's therapist is trained to prioritize Sophia's personal boundaries and self-actualization. If Sophia expresses that David's presence feels heavy or that his needs feel like a burden, the modern therapeutic response is often to validate those feelings as a sign of incompatibility or emotional labor imbalance. The therapist, attempting to remain neutral and supportive of their client, unintentionally acts as a catalyst for the divorce now mentality by reinforcing the idea that any discomfort is a sign of a toxic environment. This brings us to the concept of the boundary weapon. In modern wellness culture, the term boundary has been reconfigured. Originally intended as a tool for healthy personal limits, it is now frequently used as an ultimatum. Historical trends in counselor-patient interactions show an increase in what is called individualistic bias. If David wants more time together, and Sophia wants more space, the therapist validates Sophia's right to her space as an essential boundary. While technically correct, this focus ignores the fact that marriage, by its very nature, requires the constant negotiation and sometimes the surrendering of individual boundaries for the sake of the union. When the wellness industry tells you that you should never have to compromise your peace, it is effectively telling you that you can never be married because marriage is a series of compromises. Consider the case study of the therapy speak breakup. We are seeing a surge in people ending long-term relationships using scripted, clinical language provided by their influencers or therapists. These scripts are designed to minimize the guilt of the person leaving, using phrases like "I am choosing to prioritize my journey," or "I no longer have the capacity to hold space for your needs." This clinical distancing is a hallmark of the divorce now mentality. By stripping away the raw, human pain of a breakup and replacing it with psychological jargon, the individual can leave without feeling like a villain. They aren't breaking a heart. They are performing a healthy boundary-setting exercise. This makes the exit feel morally superior, which in turn makes it much more likely to happen. Furthermore, we must analyze the influence of the wellness industrial complex. In 2026, self-care is a multi-billion-dollar industry that profits from the idea that you are a project that needs constant upgrading. If your spouse is not part of that upgrade, they are viewed as a bug in the system. We see this in the proliferation of solo retreats, healing journeys, and Manifest Your Best Life workshops that specifically target married individuals experiencing a midlife plateau. These programs often frame the spouse as an anchor preventing the individual from flying. Data suggests that individuals who engage heavily in solo wellness culture are significantly more likely to initiate a divorce within 24 months. This isn't necessarily because the programs are bad, but because they foster an environment of extreme self-focus that is incompatible with the self-sacrifice required for a long-term partnership. Step by step, the path from the therapy office to the divorce court often looks like this. It starts with the identification of needs, where the individual is encouraged to list everything they aren't getting from their partner. Then comes the validation of resentment, where the therapist or support group confirms that the individual is indeed being neglected. This is followed by the implementation of non-negotiables, where the individual presents a list of demands to the spouse that are often impossible to meet overnight. When the spouse inevitably fails to meet these new, high-level psychological demands, the final step is the exit of empowerment. The divorce is framed not as a tragedy of a broken home, but as the triumphant first step toward a new, enlightened life. The psychological impact of this shift cannot be overstated. We are moving toward a society where commitment is conditional upon the current state of our internal emotional weather. If the weather changes, the commitment dissolves. This creates a state of permanent relational fragility. Imagine if a bank operated this way. If they could retract a loan simply because they didn't feel like being a lender that day, the entire financial system would collapse. Yet, we are applying this exact logic to the foundation of our social structure. The divorce now mentality is the inevitable result of a culture that has replaced the virtue of endurance with the virtue of self-expression. But there is an even more profound driver at play here, one that goes beyond the therapy couch and into the very architecture of our homes and cities. In the United States, we have designed a world that makes being single look like the ultimate luxury, while being part of a family looks like a series of logistical nightmares. We have created an environment where the solo consumer is king. The way we build our apartments, the way we design our apps, and even the way we structure our taxes is slowly tilting the scales in favor of the individual over the couple. As we peel back the next layer, we have to look at the physical reality of the American lifestyle. It isn't just about how we think. It's about where we live and how we move. We are entering an era of social atomization, where the traditional supports that kept a marriage together, the nosy neighbor, the local church, the extended family living down the street, have all vanished. In their place, we have the isolation of the suburban sprawl and the anonymity of the high-rise. In the next part, we are going to explore the death of the village and how the modern American housing crisis is secretly a primary driver of the divorce now mentality. We will look at why your 3,000 square foot house might actually be the biggest threat to your marriage, and how the loss of community has turned every domestic argument into a high-stakes standoff with no witnesses and no way out. The high-stakes standoff of modern marriage is exacerbated by a phenomenon sociologists call the privatization of struggle. In the United States of 2026, the architectural layout of our lives has created a profound structural isolation. Historically, the American family existed within a dense web of external observations and interventions. There was the nosy neighbor over the backyard fence, the multi-generational household where a grandmother could pull a stressed parent aside, and the local community centers that provided a physical escape valve for domestic tension. Today, we have traded that community for square footage. We live in large, climate-controlled pods that are designed to keep the outside world out. This lack of a witness means that when a marriage begins to fray, there is no one to provide perspective, no one to babysit on a whim so the couple can reconnect, and no one to model healthy conflict resolution. The domestic space has become a pressure cooker with no safety valve. Imagine a character named Kevin. Kevin is a 42-year-old project manager living in a sprawling cul-de-sac in a suburb of Phoenix. He and his wife, Maya, live in a 4-bedroom home with high walls and a 3-car garage. On the surface, this is the American dream. But in 2026, the reality is that Kevin and Maya are functionally isolated. Their parents live 2,000 miles away. They know the names of only 2 neighbors, and their interactions are limited to a hand wave from a moving SUV. When Kevin and Maya argue, the conflict is contained entirely within their 4 walls. There is no external social pressure to behave well, and more importantly, there is no community support to help them through the low points. If they hit a rough patch, the divorce now mentality feels like the only logical escape because the environment offers no other alternatives for relief. This brings us to the concept of the burden of the nuclear family. Historical trends show that the nuclear family, 2 parents and their children living in total independence, is actually a biological anomaly. For the vast majority of human history, children were raised and marriages were maintained by the tribe or the village. By stripping away the village, we have placed an impossible emotional load on the marital unit. We expect our spouse to be our only source of deep emotional intimacy, our only co-parent, and our only domestic partner. When one person inevitably fails to carry that 300-pound emotional load, the marriage collapses. In 2026, we are seeing that the divorce now mentality is often a reaction to this exhaustion. People aren't necessarily tired of their partners. They are tired of the isolation that modern American living requires of them. Consider the case study of the suburban sprawl and divorce rates. Data suggests a correlation between long commute times and marital dissolution. In the United States, as housing costs drive families further away from urban centers, parents are spending more time in their cars and less time in their relationships. When Kevin spends 90 minutes a day in traffic, he returns home with 0 emotional bandwidth left for Maya. Maya, who has been managing the household in her own remote job, is similarly depleted. The result is a relationship lived in the margins of a commute. The divorce now mentality thrives in these margins. It is much easier to walk away from a partner you only see during the high-stress windows of 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. than it is to walk away from someone who is integrated into a rich, shared social life. Furthermore, we must analyze the economic architecture of the modern home. In 2026, the American housing market has become a significant driver of relationship decisions. We are seeing a historical trend of what experts call the housing trap. In some cases, couples stay together longer than they want to because neither can afford a separate apartment in a high cost of living area. However, once a certain financial threshold is met, the housing market actually facilitates the divorce now mentality. The rise of institutional investors buying up single-family homes has created a robust rental market that allows one spouse to move out and into a comparable lifestyle almost instantly. The friction of moving has been reduced by professionalized relocation services and short-term corporate housing. This mobility means that the physical act of leaving a marriage is no longer a logistical nightmare. It is a weekend project. Step by step, the loss of community changes the trajectory of an argument. In a communal society, an argument might be interrupted by a knock on the door or a planned social gathering. These interruptions act as a pattern interrupt, forcing the couple to regulate their emotions for a public audience. This regulation often leads to de-escalation. In the isolated American home of 2026, there is no pattern interrupt. An argument can spiral for hours, days, or weeks because there is no external reality to break the cycle. The couple becomes locked in a feedback loop of resentment. Eventually, the brain identifies the partner as the source of the pain, rather than the isolation itself. The divorce now mentality then presents itself as the only way to regain peace of mind. We also have to look at the disappearance of third places. A third place is a social environment outside of home and work, like a local pub, a church, or a park where people congregate. In 2026, these places are being replaced by digital spaces. When Kevin is unhappy at home, he doesn't go to a local club to talk to other men who have been married for 30 years and can offer seasoned advice. He goes to a subreddit or a social media group where he finds thousands of other frustrated people who validate his desire to leave. This digital third place is an echo chamber for the divorce now mentality. It provides the social proof that leaving is the standard, modern, and even healthy choice, while offering no counter-narrative about the value of endurance or the cyclical nature of long-term love. The United States is currently experiencing a loneliness epidemic that is paradoxically fueling divorce. You would think that lonely people would cling to their partners, but the data suggests the opposite. Loneliness within a marriage is more painful than loneliness outside of one. When the cultural narrative shifts to suggest that you should be living your best life, and that your partner is responsible for your happiness, any dip in that happiness is seen as a failure of the marriage. The divorce now mentality is the search for an external solution to an internal or environmental problem. We are trying to fix a lack of community by changing our legal status. As we examine this architectural and social isolation, we realize that the American home has become a fortress that is too well defended. It protects us from the world, but it also traps us with our own unresolved conflicts. But what happens when the conflict isn't just about space or chores? What happens when the very definition of what it means to be a man or a woman in America undergoes a seismic shift? We are currently in the middle of the greatest gender role negotiation in human history. The rules that governed our parents' marriages have been shredded, and the new rules haven't been written yet. In the next part, we are going to dive into the gender war and the divorce now mentality. We will look at why the rise of the alpha female and the crisis of the modern male are creating a friction point that is tearing American households apart at the seams. We'll explore the data behind who is actually initiating these divorces and the shocking reason why being a successful man in 2026 might actually make you a prime candidate for a surprise filing. To understand why being a successful man in 2026 makes you a prime candidate for a surprise filing, we have to examine the data regarding the initiation of divorce in the United States. Historical trends consistently show that women initiate nearly 70% of divorces in heterosexual marriages. When you filter for college-educated couples, that number jumps to nearly 90%. This is not a coincidence. It is the result of a massive misalignment in gender role expectations that has reached a breaking point. In 2026, we are seeing the emergence of the resentment gap. While women have successfully integrated into the workforce and achieved high levels of financial autonomy, the domestic expectations placed upon them have not significantly decreased. Meanwhile, many men are still operating on a social script from 1995, focusing primarily on their role as providers while failing to realize that in a dual-income world, the provider role no longer buys the same level of relational immunity it once did. Imagine a character named Robert. Robert is a 48-year-old high-earning surgeon in Atlanta. He works 60 hours a week, earns a top 1% income, and ensures his family lives in a pristine estate with every luxury imaginable. In his mind, he is winning at marriage. He is the ultimate provider. However, his wife, Jennifer, who also has a successful career as an interior designer, feels a deep sense of emotional abandonment. She manages the children's complex schedules, coordinates the household maintenance, and handles the emotional heavy lifting for the family. In 2026, Jennifer does not need Robert's money for survival. When she looks at her life, she sees a partner who is a roommate she shares a bank account with, rather than a companion. Because she has the financial means to leave, her threshold for dissatisfaction is much lower. Robert is stunned when he is served with papers, but Jennifer has been mentally checked out for 3 years. This is the success paradox. The very drive that made Robert a professional success made him a relational liability. This leads us to the concept of the mental load and the divorce now mentality. In the United States today, the invisible labor of managing a household is still overwhelmingly performed by women, regardless of their career status. We are seeing a historical trend where women are essentially working 2 full-time jobs, one at the office and one at home. When the wellness culture we discussed earlier meets this reality, it creates a powerful narrative of liberation. The message Jennifer receives from her social circle and her digital feeds is that she is being exploited by her marriage. The divorce now mentality is marketed to her as the only way to reclaim her time and her sanity. For many high-achieving women, divorce is not seen as a loss of status, but as a shedding of unnecessary weight. Consider the data on the male loneliness crisis as a counterpoint. While women are initiating the split, men like Robert are the ones who suffer the most significant long-term decline in health and happiness post-divorce. Historical trends indicate that married men are healthier, live longer, and are more successful than single men. This is because wives often act as the primary social and health regulators for their husbands. When the divorce now mentality claims a household, a man often loses his primary social connection and his only emotional outlet. This creates a feedback loop where men become increasingly wary of marriage, leading to the rise of the MGTOW, men going their own way philosophy. In 2026, we are seeing a generation of young men who are opting out of the marriage market entirely because they perceive the divorce now mentality as an inevitable trap where they lose their assets, their children, and their identity. Step by step, the gender war in the living room follows a predictable pattern. It starts with the domestic stalemate, where arguments over chores and childcare become proxies for arguments over respect and value. This transitions into the silence phase, where the initiating spouse stops complaining. Men often mistake this silence for peace, but in reality, it is the sound of the exit plan being finalized. Then comes the financial audit, where the spouse preparing to leave ensures they have a clear understanding of the marital estate. Finally, there is the strategic filing. In 2026, the use of temporary restraining orders and exclusive use of the residence motions has become a standard tactical opening in divorce proceedings. The goal is to establish a status quo of the man being out of the house, which heavily influences subsequent custody and support rulings. We must also analyze the hypergamy pivot. Historically, women tended to marry up, seeking partners with higher status or income. As women's earnings have surged, the pool of men who meet the traditional criteria of marriage material has shrunk. This has created a friction point in existing marriages where a woman may feel she has outgrown her husband's ambition or social standing. The divorce now mentality in 2026 is often fueled by this sense of relative deprivation. Even if a couple is doing well, if the wife perceives that her peers are marrying more dynamic or aligned partners, the current marriage begins to feel like a compromise she is no longer willing to make. Furthermore, let's look at the case study of the beta male devaluation. In modern American culture, the traits of the stable, reliable, and predictable husband are often characterized in media and online discourse as boring or uninspiring. We have replaced the value of reliability with the value of excitement. When a marriage enters the predictable plateau phase, the divorce now mentality suggests that the boredom is a sign of a dead relationship, rather than a natural season. This is particularly prevalent in the US, where the consumerist need for novelty has infected our romantic expectations. Men who are doing everything right, by traditional standards find themselves being penalized for a lack of spontaneity or edge. The 2026 gender landscape is one of deep suspicion. Men are afraid of the legal and financial meat grinder of the divorce courts, and women are afraid of the soul-crushing boredom and inequity of traditional domesticity. This mutual fear is the primary engine of the divorce now mentality. We are no longer viewing marriage as a team sport. We are viewing it as a zero-sum game. If you are winning, it means your partner is losing, and vice versa. This adversarial mindset makes the smallest disagreement feel like a battle for the future of your soul. But there is a specific, often overlooked catalyst that turns this gender friction into a legal reality. It isn't just about how we feel about each other. It's about the people we hire to represent those feelings. We are entering an era of predatory advocacy, where the legal system itself is designed to escalate conflict rather than resolve it. In the next part, we are going to look at the divorce industrial complex and how the business of breaking up has become one of the most profitable sectors of the American economy. We will explore how your lawyer's duty to get you the best deal might be the very thing that ensures you and your children end up in a decades-long cycle of trauma and litigation. We are going to expose the conflict creators and why the system is rigged to make sure no one ever leaves a marriage with their dignity or their savings intact. The divorce industrial complex is a multi-billion-dollar machine that thrives on the acceleration of human conflict. In the United States of 2026, the legal framework surrounding the dissolution of marriage has evolved into a system that often prioritizes billable hours over bilateral resolution. To understand the divorce now mentality, we must look at the economic incentives of the professionals involved. When a couple enters the legal system, they are no longer viewed as a family in crisis. They are viewed as two separate revenue streams. Historical trends in family law suggest that the more adversarial a divorce becomes, the more profitable it is for the industry. This creates a structural bias toward escalation. A quick, amicable split might cost a few $1,000s in filing fees and mediation, but a contested battle involving depositions, forensic accounting, and custody evaluators can easily reach hundreds of thousands of dollars. Imagine a character named Thomas. Thomas is a 50-year-old entrepreneur in Chicago who has built a successful logistics company. When he and his wife, Karen, decide to separate, they initially plan to keep things civil for the sake of their 3 teenagers. However, the moment they hire separate high-powered attorneys, the dynamic shifts. In 2026, the standard legal playbook involves the immediate filing of discovery motions that demand every text message, every bank statement, and every email from the last decade. Thomas's lawyer explains that this is a protective measure, but to Karen, it feels like an act of war. Karen's lawyer responds by suggesting she seek a temporary support order that exceeds Thomas's liquid cash flow. This is the manufactured crisis. By creating financial and emotional stress early in the process, the divorce industrial complex ensures that neither party feels safe enough to compromise. This brings us to the concept of the conflict creators. These are the secondary and tertiary players in the divorce ecosystem, whose livelihoods depend on the continuation of the divorce now mentality. This includes custody evaluators, guardian ad litems, and parental coordinators. In 2026, we are seeing a historical trend where these professionals are increasingly involved in even low-conflict cases. Case studies of family court proceedings reveal a pattern. Once a third-party expert is brought in to evaluate the best interests of the child, the parents stop communicating directly. They begin to communicate through the experts, who charge per hour for every phone call and report. This outsourcing of parental judgment not only drains the marital estate, but also creates a permanent rift in the co-parenting relationship. The system effectively rewards the parent who can best perform for the evaluator, rather than the parent who is most focused on the child's stability. We also have to examine the role of forensic accountants in the 2026 landscape. As digital assets and complex compensation structures like RSUs and stock options become the norm for middle-class American families, the cost of dividing the pie has skyrocketed. A forensic accountant can spend 40 hours untangling a single brokerage account, billed at $500 an hour. For a couple like Thomas and Karen, the cost of determining who owns what can sometimes exceed the value of the assets being disputed. This is the sunk cost fallacy of divorce. Once you have spent $50,000 trying to prove your spouse is hiding money, you cannot afford to stop until you find it, even if the money isn't there. The divorce now mentality is sustained by the hope that the next legal motion will finally provide the leverage needed to win. Furthermore, let's look at the predatory nature of the litigation funding industry. In 2026, we are seeing a rise in third-party companies that offer high-interest loans to spouses who don't have direct access to marital funds. These companies bet on the outcome of the divorce settlement. While marketed as a way to level the playing field, these loans often act as fuel for the fire. If a spouse has an unlimited line of credit to fund their legal battle, they have no incentive to settle early. This turns the divorce into a war of attrition where the only winners are the lenders and the lawyers. Historical trends show that marriages that could have been saved through intensive counseling are instead incinerated in the furnace of prolonged litigation. Step by step, the system is designed to strip away the human element. It starts with the initial consultation, where the lawyer often highlights the worst-case scenarios to justify a high retainer. This is followed by the strategic silence, where attorneys discourage their clients from speaking to each other without counsel present. This breaks the last remaining bonds of trust. Then comes the paper storm, a barrage of legal motions designed to overwhelm the opposition. By the time a couple reaches a mediation table, they have often spent so much money and said such terrible things about each other in legal filings that reconciliation is no longer a psychological possibility. The system has successfully transformed a husband and wife into plaintiff and defendant. Consider the data on the financial erosion of the American middle class through divorce. In the United States, divorce is one of the primary drivers of downward mobility. A household that was comfortably middle class is often split into two households that are both struggling. The divorce now mentality fails to account for the reality that maintaining two roofs, two sets of utilities, and two separate lives is nearly double the cost of a shared life. In 2026, with inflation and housing costs at historic highs, the economic impact of the divorce industrial complex is devastating. We are seeing a generation of Americans who will never be able to retire because their wealth was liquidated to pay for a 3-year legal battle over a house they ended up having to sell anyway. Imagine if we applied this legal model to any other area of life. If every time you had a disagreement with a business partner, the law required you to spend 3 years and your entire life savings to resolve it, no one would ever start a business. Yet, this is the standard operating procedure for the most important contract in society. The divorce industrial complex doesn't just process divorces. It creates the cultural conditions that make divorce feel inevitable. It markets a clean break that doesn't exist, promising a sense of justice that the legal system is not equipped to provide. The tragedy of the 2026 divorce landscape is that the more a couple fights, the less there is left to fight over. The assets are bled away into legal fees, and the emotional health of the children is sacrificed at the altar of the best interests of the child. This is the hidden engine of the divorce now mentality. It is a system that views peace as a lost opportunity for profit. But there is an even deeper, more insidious shift happening. It's not just about the money or the lawyers. It's about the way the American public has begun to view the very concept of time and aging. As we move toward the conclusion of this masterclass, we have to address the biological clock and the second act narrative. We are living in a culture that has become obsessed with the idea that we can always start over, no matter the age, no matter the cost. But what happens when the second act doesn't live up to the hype? In the next part, we are going to explore the post-divorce reality check and the rise of divorce regret. We will look at the shocking data on what life actually looks like 5 years after the papers are signed, and why the freedom promised by the divorce now mentality often turns into a different kind of prison. We will dive into the impact on the next generation, and how the choices made in 2026 are hardwiring the brains of American children for a future of relational instability. The post-divorce reality check begins when the adrenaline of the legal battle fades, and the silence of a split household sets in. In the United States of 2026, we are observing a significant rise in what researchers call the regret curve. While the immediate aftermath of a divorce often brings a surge of relief, a neurochemical response to the cessation of acute conflict, data from 5-year longitudinal studies suggests a different long-term outcome. For many, the freedom they chased turns out to be a form of social and economic isolation they were unprepared to manage. The divorce now mentality operates on the assumption that life is a series of independent chapters, but the reality is that the ghost of the previous marriage haunts every financial decision, every holiday, and every milestone for decades to come. Imagine a character named Linda. Linda is a 54-year-old former educator in Pennsylvania who initiated a divorce in 2024, believing that her second act would be defined by travel, self-discovery, and a new, more compatible partner. By 2026, the reality has settled in. Linda's household income has been permanently reduced by 40%. The social circle she shared with her husband has fractured. Many friends, uncomfortable with the divided loyalties, have simply stopped calling. The travel she envisioned is financially out of reach because she is now solely responsible for a mortgage and her own retirement planning. Most strikingly, the dating market for a woman in her mid-50s is not the vibrant, respectful landscape the digital algorithms promised her. Linda represents a growing demographic of Americans who realized too late that while their marriage was imperfect, the alternative is a different, often more grueling set of challenges. This brings us to the concept of the hedonic treadmill of relationships. In behavioral psychology, the hedonic treadmill is the tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative events. When someone adopts the divorce now mentality to escape boredom or moderate discontent, they often find that after the initial excitement of a new partner or a new apartment wears off, their baseline level of happiness remains unchanged. They have traded one set of problems for another. Historical trends in second and third marriages support this. The divorce rate for second marriages in the US is approximately 60%, and for third marriages, it climbs to over 70%. This data suggests that unless the internal patterns of the individual change, the external change of a spouse is a temporary fix for a permanent psychological state. We must also confront the devastating impact on the next generation, the children of 2026. We are currently conducting a massive, unplanned social experiment on the brains of American youth. When a child grows up in an environment where the most fundamental contract in their lives can be dissolved due to a shift in emotional weather, it changes their neurobiology. This is the attachment fracture. Research into adverse childhood experiences indicates that the instability of a high conflict or sudden divorce can hardwire a child's nervous system for hypervigilance. They learn that love is conditional, and that security is an illusion. As these children reach adulthood, they often exhibit one of two extremes: a paralyzing fear of commitment or a tendency toward disorganized attachment styles that replicate the very divorce now patterns they witnessed. Consider the case study of the transitioning home. In 2026, the logistical reality for millions of American children is the two-home existence. Every Sunday, these children perform a ritual of displacement, moving their lives from one parent's house to another's. While we tell ourselves that children are resilient, the data on academic performance, emotional regulation, and long-term relationship success suggests a different story. The cognitive load of navigating two different sets of household rules, two different emotional atmospheres, and often two competing parental narratives is exhausting. This exhaustion manifests in higher rates of anxiety and a decreased ability to focus on long-term goals. We are essentially raising a generation of corporate commuters before they even hit puberty. Furthermore, we are seeing the rise of the parentified child. In the wake of the divorce now mentality, many parents turn to their children for emotional support that should come from a partner or a therapist. In the United States, we see a historical trend where children of divorce are forced to grow up too fast, acting as mediators or confidants for their parents. This creates a psychological burden that prevents the child from developing their own healthy identity. By the time these children reach their 20s in the 2030s and 2040s, they are often emotionally depleted, viewing the very concept of family with a deep-seated cynicism. Step by step, the erosion of the next generation's relational health follows a specific trajectory. It begins with the loss of the secure base. A child needs to know that no matter what happens in the outside world, the home is a constant. When that constant is removed, the child's energy is diverted from exploration and learning to survival and monitoring. This is followed by the loyalty conflict, where the child feels they must choose sides to ensure their own safety and belonging. Finally, there is the normalization of dissolution. The child grows up seeing divorce not as a tragic failure of a sacred bond, but as a standard administrative procedure. This lowers their own exit bar before they ever enter their first serious relationship. We also have to discuss the economic inheritance gap. Divorce in America is one of the most effective ways to destroy intergenerational wealth. When assets are liquidated to pay for legal fees and the maintenance of two separate lifestyles, there is less left for college funds, down payments for the next generation, or inheritances. The divorce now mentality is, in many ways, a massive transfer of wealth from families to the legal and financial services industries. In 2026, as the cost of living continues to outpace wage growth, this loss of family equity is creating a permanent class of relationship renters, people who can never build the stability required to truly thrive. The tragedy of the modern American breakup is that it is often a permanent solution to a temporary problem. We have been sold a narrative that our lives are a solo performance, and that anyone who doesn't perfectly facilitate our individual happiness is an obstacle to be removed. But the data from the post-divorce reality check shows that we are inherently social creatures who thrive on the very stability and endurance that the divorce now mentality devalues. The freedom of being alone is often just the freedom to be forgotten by a system that only values you as a consumer. As we reach the final stage of this masterclass, we have to ask the most difficult question of all. Is there a way back? Is it possible to reverse the cultural tide and rebuild a culture of commitment in an age of infinite distraction and frictionless exits? We have analyzed the tech, the laws, the gender wars, and the regret. In the final part, we are going to explore the new counterculture, the growing movement of Americans who are rejecting the divorce now mentality and pioneering a radical new way of staying together. We will look at the specific strategies being used to divorce-proof a life in 2026, and how the most revolutionary thing you can do in the modern world is simply stay. We will reveal the one secret that the divorce industrial complex hopes you never find out. The secret that the divorce industrial complex hopes you never find out is that the vast majority of unhappily married couples who stay together report being significantly happier 5 years later. This is not a matter of magical transformation, but a reflection of the cyclical nature of human long-term partnerships. In the United States of 2026, we have been conditioned to treat a seasonal dip in marital satisfaction as a permanent defect. However, historical trends and longitudinal data suggest that marital misery is often a temporary state, provided there is no abuse or high-level toxicity. The new counterculture emerging in America is built on the radical realization that endurance is a form of emotional intelligence, not a lack of self-respect. Imagine a character named Daniel. Daniel is a 39-year-old engineer in Denver who, in 2026, finds himself in the middle of a cold, silent marriage. He and his wife, Clara, have spent the last 2 years drifting apart, focused on their careers and their young children. The divorce now mentality is screaming at Daniel from every podcast, every social media feed, and every casual conversation with divorced coworkers. They tell him that he has one life, that he deserves to be happy, and that Clara is simply his starter wife. But Daniel decides to join the growing movement of pro-marriage realists. Instead of filing for divorce, he and Clara enter into what sociologists call a marriage sabbatical, a period where they stop trying to fix each other and instead focus on radical acceptance. They acknowledge that the current season of their life is difficult and boring, but they refuse to make a permanent decision based on a temporary season. This brings us to the concept of the marital horizon. In 2026, the successful counterculture couples are those who have extended their time horizon. When you view a marriage through the lens of a 60-year commitment, a 2-year rough patch represents only 3% of the total journey. This shift in perspective is a powerful antidote to the impulsivity of the modern age. Historical trends show that couples who survive these plateaus often develop a deeper, more resilient form of intimacy that is impossible to achieve in a first-act relationship. They move from the passionate, volatile love of their 20s into a weathered, indestructible partnership in their 40s and 50s. The divorce now mentality robs people of this second half of the story. Consider the case study of the community-based reconciliation movement. In various parts of the United States, we are seeing the rise of informal marital councils, groups of older, long-married couples who mentor younger couples through the dark years. This is the recreation of the village we discussed in Part 6. By inviting a witness back into the marriage, couples like Daniel and Clara are forced to regulate their behavior and are given the perspective they lack. These mentors offer real-world examples of how they survived infidelity, financial ruin, or deep emotional disconnect. This social proof provides a counter-narrative to the divorce party culture. It frames staying together as a high-status achievement rather than a passive failure of nerve. We also need to analyze the specific strategy of the financial reintegration. In 2026, some couples are intentionally moving away from the siloed household model. By merging their finances entirely, they are increasing the switching costs of a divorce. While this sounds counterintuitive in an era of individual autonomy, it acts as a structural stabilizer. When your lives are deeply messily intertwined, you are forced to work through a problem because the cost of leaving is too high to be a first-order solution. This creates a forced growth environment. You can't just run away, so you have to learn how to communicate. The data suggests that couples with high levels of financial and social interdependence report higher levels of long-term security and lower levels of chronic anxiety. Step by step, The process of divorce-proofing a life in 2026 involves a digital detox of the heart. It starts with the unplugging from the shadow audience. Successful couples are choosing to take their relationship offline, refusing to use their spouse as a prop for social validation or a target for public venting. This is followed by the rejection of therapy speak. Instead of using clinical labels like narcissist or gaslighting, these couples are returning to a language of shared responsibility and grace. They recognize that everyone is difficult to live with, and that the goal isn't to find a perfect person, but to become a person capable of loving an imperfect one. Finally, there is the cultivation of shared meaning. Whether it is through a shared hobby, a spiritual practice, or a common mission, these couples build a world that is bigger than just the two of them. The economic reality of 2026 is also driving this counterculture. As the cost of the divorce industrial complex becomes clearer, a new form of pragmatism is taking root. People are realizing that the financial destruction caused by a midlife split often ripples down for 3 generations. By staying together and working through the boredom, a couple is not just saving their relationship, they are protecting the inheritance and stability of their children and grandchildren. This is a return to the multi-generational mindset that defined the United States before the era of expressive individualism. Furthermore, we must look at the psychological concept of the second marriage within the first. The secret to long-term success in 2026 is the understanding that you will have 5 or 6 different marriages to the same person. The person you married at 25 is not the same person you are living with at 45. The divorce now mentality suggests that when the person changes, the marriage should end. The counterculture suggests that when the person changes, the marriage must be renegotiated. This requires a high level of flexibility and the willingness to mourn the old version of the relationship to make room for the new one. As we conclude this deep dive masterclass, we must recognize that the divorce now mentality is a byproduct of a specific historical moment. A moment of extreme individualism, technological disruption, and legal professionalization. But history is not a straight line. It is a circle. We are already seeing the first signs of a return to a more communal, committed, and resilient American family. The Revolutionary Act in 2026 is not to leave, but to stay, to build, and to endure. The statistics may tell you that your marriage is a coin flip, but you are not a statistic. You are an agent of your own history. The cultural shift we have mapped out over these 10 parts is vast. We have covered the legal traps, the digital gaslighting, the gender wars, and the financial engines of the breakup industry. But all of these forces share a single weakness. They cannot survive a couple that decides to be a fortress. When 2 people decide that their union is the one thing in their lives that is not for sale and not up for negotiation, the entire divorce industrial complex loses its power. While we have reached the end of this masterclass on the divorce now mentality, the story of the American family is only entering its next chapter. There is a looming demographic shift that no one is talking about. A change so profound it will alter the very definition of what we call a household by the year 2030. It involves the rise of the co-living contract and the end of the traditional nuclear home as we know it. But that is a deep dive for another time. For now, the question remains: in an age of easy exits, what will you choose to build that lasts?